Screen Time Stories is presented by Pinwheel. With Pinwheel, you get to set limits on your child's smartphone to match their maturity level. As your child grows, you can open up more features to guide their independence. There are many options that come with a Pinwheel smartphone, like allowing approved contacts only, remotely monitoring messages, selecting expert-vetted apps based on professional guidance, and scheduling mode to keep your kids living in the moment. Connect authentically with a Pinwheel smartphone for kids and teens. For a 10% discount, use code PODCAST10 at checkout.
Today we're learning about a unique way to build a trusting relationship with our kids around technology by applying a research-based approach called collaborative and proactive solutions, or CPS. This parenting approach helps us caregivers notice and focus on why our kids show concerning behaviors, and then work with our kids to solve their underlying problems. My favorite part of this method is that we're teaching our kids to be the authority in their own lives, which will obviously be so beneficial to them as adults. My guest today will help us understand this model better through further explanation and real-world examples. I'm pleased to welcome Kim Hopkins, the Director of Outreach and Communication for Dr. Ross Greene's nonprofit, Lives in the Balance. Kim is a clinical social worker who has managed multiple organizations that serve youth and families in residential facilities, foster homes, therapeutic day schools, and homeless shelters. And she's been utilizing the collaborative and proactive solutions model for over a decade. Kim, thank you so much for joining me. I appreciate you taking the time to share with us today.
Oh, it's my pleasure. We love collaborating and helping folks who are doing good work. So
thank you. Do you want to just start by telling me about you as a person? Just tell me about yourself. Yeah,
I like to talk about my journey too, because I was not trained this way. I was trained the exact opposite of what we're going to talk about today.
I love that.
Yeah. So I'm a clinical social worker. I've been in the field for 25 years. Hate to add that up. Doesn't seem possible, but I'm only 29. So, and I worked the first part of my career in residential care for working with adolescents ages 12 to 22 and their families. While I was working there, we noticed that the ways that we were trying to be helpful weren't actually helping kids. And if we were helping them, it wasn't really sustainable when they left us. So by that, I mean, we did the traditional rewards and consequence thing, because that's what we're taught is good parenting, good educating, good provision of services to kids. And we had some really archaic ways and creative ways of trying to make kids want to do things. We could restrain kids, we could seclude them, we could keep them from seeing their families, which I'm pleased to tell you is no longer allowed in the state of Massachusetts where I worked. There is seclusion, but these things were, if they even worked, they tend to only work for a short amount of time. We were restraining kids 400 times a year across our 12 programs. My nose has been broken in a restraint and my ribs have been bruised. And we were like, this is not therapeutic for anybody. This is not helping, right? So we were thinking about that. We were also thinking about the piece where, if kids did make gains, if they stepped down to a less restrictive setting with less adults around, whether they went home or went to a foster home or went from our therapeutic day school back to a public school, they often lost the gains that were made. Likely because we realized we were so reliant on extrinsic control.
Yeah.
And so that they hadn't internalized what they needed to do well on their own. So we were thinking about these things, and just so happened that the state of Massachusetts was recontracting with providers like us, gives them a chance to request latest research be integrated into treatment envelopes, right? And so they were asking at the time for a model that was evidence-based and portable. So evidence-based meaning rooted in research, portable, meaning that it didn't just work with lots of adults around, that it was also something parents could do, foster parents could do, teachers could do, right? So we really needed to find something different. And then it was just serendipity, where a colleague of mine had said, hey, if you need credit for your license, which I always needed credits for my license, you should go hear this guy speak, Dr. Ross Green. He is a phenomenal speaker. And I thought, okay, he's speaking in Freeport, Maine, which is the home of LL Bean and lots of great shopping. So I thought, if he's terrible, I'm gonna leave early. I'm not gonna go shopping. But he wasn't terrible. And not only that, I had no idea I was gonna find the answer to everything that we were grappling with.
Wow.
That started quite a journey. This was a 180-degree shift in thinking from how I was trained and how we were all trained. I mean, I was trained in straight up behavior modification, right?
Yeah.
And this is not that. And yet, when we changed how we were thinking about kids and therefore changed how we intervened with them, we saw different kids. Absolutely. And these were kids that were really good at trying to make us think they didn't care, that they weren't motivated, because they just had given up. They had been misunderstood for so long. And once we understood them with more accurate, compassionate, research-based lenses, and then we crafted interventions from that new understanding, they functioned better.
Amazing.
We saw different kids.
Can you think of any examples of a specific child that benefited from the change, the 180?
Yeah, if I'm thinking way back then, my favorite is probably my chair thrower. He threw chairs. And so we talk about kids' behavioral signal as just that. It's just a signal. It's just a fever, right? It doesn't really matter if it's crying or sulking like my 12-year-old daughter does, or, that's pretty low end. She's lucky in that respect, right? My 7-year-old son, he's a little less lucky because he's a screamer, hitter, thrower. The chair thrower I'm thinking about, much less lucky, right? And so what determines how kids are lucky or not? Well, depends on how the adults respond to their behavioral signal, right? And so, when we respond in the way that we're taught in terms of behavior modification, we're really doing some dangerous things to just kids who are simply unlucky in how they're signaling that there's a problem they don't know how to solve and they lack the skills to solve it. So anyhow, I think about my chair thrower often because he threw chairs and that freaked people out. He was pretty unlucky. Once we stopped getting mired down in the chair throwing and how often he was throwing the chairs and was he trying to hit anybody and all this other stuff, that wasn't the interesting, needed observational data. What we needed to think about was what happened before, right? What expectation did he run into that he couldn't meet? In other words, what problem did he run into that he couldn't solve? It turned out he threw chairs for different reasons. One in particular was that he had a hard time when the plan changed. So one time he threw a chair at school because he arrived at school and they said, hey, great news. We have a super fun, what do they call it at schools? I'm losing my words here. We have a, what's that?
A pep rally?
Something like that. It's anyway,
field
some sort
day.
Of gathering.
I'm trying to think of all
we've got a magician coming in. There's a word for it. Anyway, and so instead of having third and fourth period today, we're going to go see the magician in our gym. And then he threw a chair.
Interesting.
And everybody's like, what is that about? Well, it doesn't matter if the magician's fun or not.
Right.
The fact was that once we understood him, we understood that his gears get stuck, right? That he has a plan and a schedule, and he has flexibility issues. He has adaptability issues. He has frustration tolerance issues that got in the way of him being able to navigate a change in his schedule. Once we understood that, we could help solve that problem with him so that he had strategies to navigate a change in schedule and that he no longer threw chairs when there was a change in schedule.
Interesting.
Which is a really important thing. Especially this kid was 16. He was going to be out working soon. And there's going to be a change in schedule if you work at Dunkin' Donuts, right? And so your boss doesn't have to know anything about this model, but we want to give you the strategies that you can take with you to work,
So it's sustainable. Like you were saying, that was the problem with the old way of doing things is the kids weren't able to take it with them when they go. And so when this whole time I thought you were talking about an elementary school student. So 16 is, 10th, 11th grade, maybe 9th. No, probably 10th or 11th, but that's a big kid. That is like ready to get a driver's license and get a job.
Yep.
And
had been misunderstood for years. For years, he'd been told, you can't throw chairs, you can't do it, it's dangerous, it's unsafe, and then given consequences, so he really felt that we didn't like it. He was very clear that nobody liked it. He was very clear that he shouldn't do it. He wasn't waking up in the morning thinking, at approximately 8:23 this morning, I'm going to throw a chair, right? But it happened anyway. So once we figured out, what problem he couldn't solve, then we could partner with him proactively, not when he's upset. Proactively is when we really want to be solving problems with kids so that it doesn't happen again.
Yeah, I'm noticing a lot of like keywords here based on this CPS model, the collaborative and proactive solutions model. First of all, that name is amazing. I think that when you it's worth just taking a second to think about collaborating and being proactive for solutions. That's such a great way to address parenting and caregiving.
And we're serious about collaborating even with littles.
Yeah. And
even
when you say
infants.
I was going to say, when you say little, I'm like, how little are we talking? So even infants.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of people think you can't do the model with a kid who doesn't have language. And really, it's very much about how the adult thinks about what they're seeing.
Yeah.
And so we naturally kind of collaborate with infants, right? An infant signals that they've got an unsolved problem. How do they signal it? They cry and scream, right? And so we're kind of like, okay, are you hungry? And then we try feeding them. Nope, you're not. How do we know that? Nonverbal feedback. You're still screaming, right? Oh, well, maybe you need to be changed. Is that it? So then we change the diaper. Oh, still screaming. Okay, maybe you're tired and we need to rock you and try to soothe you to sleep. Oh, that's the problem, right? Because now they're quieting down. The eyes are getting droopy, right? Oh, you needed a nap. And so, we're not thinking infants are out to get us. They're manipulating us. They want attention. They're coercing us, right? But somewhere along the line, that changes.
Yeah.
And maybe it's when kids do gain some language that we start thinking, oh, here we go, right?
Yeah.
But really, it's not the case, right? They're doing the best they can with the skills they've got, and their behavior is not intentional. It's not how they want it to go. We know that because they suffer more than we do, and we suffer. No doubt. But they don't want to be upsetting us. They care about us, and they don't want to be looking different from every other kid in the home or in school or whatnot. That's not what they want, right? They and why they lack skills? Well, the research doesn't really agree upon that. It doesn't really matter to us because the intervention's the same. But there's some oftentimes we have no idea why they lack skills. My daughter, I always say, she came here skilled. She has skills to handle school. She has skills to handle most things at home. My son came here less skilled. And so, when I go to teacher conferences and they praise me for my daughter, they always want to clone her, right? She's the model student. And I don't take credit. I say we're very lucky because I'm not taking the blame for my son.
Yeah.
It isn't about that. It's about what they came here with, and thankfully, we've been able to do a lot of work with him. And so he's functioning a lot better these days. We've given him some strategies. We still have work to do.
Yeah, I'm curious if there are any, it sounds like you are so in the weeds with this. You could apply really specific strategies to everybody's different behavioral traits. But just thinking in terms of, the average kid, say you have a 12 to 14-year-old kid, are there any basic applications that the CPS model uses that you try to apply?
Yeah, well, first, it all starts with our assessment of lagging skills and unsolved problems. And this is not a hard thing to use, but it is a very important tool because we want to understand why this kid exhibits challenging behavior in the face of frustration. And we want to figure out when this happens. So we say we've got to answer the questions why and when. That's going to do a few things. It's going to keep our kids do well if they can lenses on, not kids do well if they want to, kids do well if they can, right?
Yeah.
It's going to make this kid predictable. And if you have a kid with several unsolved problems, it's going to really help kind of put this roadmap together for getting things going in a good direction, because we can't solve everything all at once. So we want to kind of figure it all out first, all the why, all the when, and then say, well, now that we have all these whens, what do we want to work on first? And what are we going to do with everything else, right? So how do we work on these things? Well, we see you having 3 options for handling unmet expectations, regardless of what they are. If we're talking about screen-related unmet expectations, if we're talking about chore-related, school-related, whatever they are, we have expectations for our kids, and we should. That's how we exhibit positive influence with them. Having expectations is great. I'm talking about the expectations you might have that are not being met. Mm-hmm. Now you have a couple of options. We call them plans. Plan A, Plan B, and Plan C. Plan A is the popular one. That's when we're going to unilaterally decide how to solve the problem, and it usually involves some consequences, right, and rewards. That's not the model. It is common, but it's not super effective for kids who lack skills. Even for kids who can adjust to use of Plan A, it doesn't breed honesty, and it actually, the relationship takes a hit, and we're not doing any problem solving or skills training with them. So there's reasons to not do it, even if you have a kid that it works for, quote unquote, works for. So that's Plan A. Plan C is where you might set the problem aside temporarily. That's not the model. And yet it's useful, because sometimes when there's so many unsolved problems, you're going to need Plan C, at least in the short term. But Plan C doesn't teach any skills, so it's not a long-term solution here, but it does keep the relationship intact, keep things calm, right? Plan B is the model. That's collaborative and proactive solutions. And there's 3 steps to the model. This is where you're going to use these 3 steps in order. Order is important, where you're going to first kind of gather information from the kid in whatever way they can communicate. If it's words, great, right? If it's pictures, fine. Sign language, great. If the kid can communicate in some way, then it's ideal to get their feedback, because they are partners, right, in this process. This is the collaborative part. This is something, we're not doing this to them, we're doing this with them. So we're going to gather information from them about what makes it hard to meet a given expectation. In other words, what makes it hard to solve a given problem. Because we can make guesses about that, but oftentimes it turns out we're wrong. So if we don't have to take, shots in the dark, we'd rather not. So let's first understand what's getting in the way. Once we have that thorough understanding, then we're going to move on to the second step, where we're going to tell them what worries us about this. Right? Usually we're worried about health or safety or progress with learning. So just, kind of a quick sentence about what worries us about the situation. And then we're on to step 3, where we're going to collaborate on a solution that meets both sets of concerns. And that's the key. If what we want to do is we want to understand kids' perspectives or concerns and give that equal weight to our own. Mm-hmm. When we're using Plan A, we don't do any understanding of the kid's perspective, and it's not even entered into the conversation. When we're doing Plan B, we're not only understanding it, we're giving it equal weight to our own, because when we work to meet kids' concerns, they often will work then to meet ours, and that's where beautiful things happen.
It's like leading a horse to water, right? You can't force it to drink. The kid is going to be more empowered and willing to work with you on solutions if they feel involved in the process. So I have a question for you. I think that I might be wrong, but I feel like most people start off with Plan A. Would you agree with that? Okay, the rewards and consequences. Okay, I think so. And I love it that you point out that this is not a good way to build honesty with our kids, which is just super important to me. And I'm totally on board here, but I'm wondering if all of us we're doing plan A, and our kids, there's this disconnect in the honesty that our kids have with us, but then we try the CPS model. How do we get that? How do we recover that little bit of honesty that we so desire, not just when we're trying to do plan B, but just all the time? I want to have an open relationship with my kiddos and, make sure that they feel heard and not judged. How do you have any ideas for how we can rebuild honesty there if we've already damaged that through the rewards and consequences model?
It's a great question. And my one word answer would be transparency. We find that honesty is really disarming.
Yeah.
When I'm coaching parents in the model, I'll say, tell your kids that you are taking a class. Tell your kids you're reading a book. Tell your kids you're trying to do something different because you get that the yelling and the sending them to their room and they're keeping them from the computer not only hasn't worked, it's actually made things worse.
Yeah.
Because when we do that, kids start to see us as standing between them and everything they like to do. We're adversaries.
Yeah.
When we collaborate, we're partners, right? And so I think it's about just being very open that the way that we were taught to help you actually hasn't helped, and in fact has made things worse and makes you feel a type of way about us, right? And so we're trying something different. We're working together to partner with you to figure out what gets in your way in certain situations so that we can then come up with strategies that you will like and you maybe even come up with, but that work for you and for us. And, trying to sort of get this cadence going. And then it's neat when we actually solve something and the kid feels like, whoa, finally I know how to do this, right? And things are going better. That really kind of starts to seal that partnership deal.
Okay.
And extinguish behavior for the adults.
Yeah.
So just lots of honesty, transparency, and ownership that the way that we are taught to parent actually doesn't work. Or it doesn't actually work for most kids. I mean, a lot of people say, well, I grew up in a Plan A house and I'm fine. I did too, and I like to think I'm fine. And I'll tell you that I was a kid who was quite skilled, but my parents missed that I actually was also a kid who could not handle a change in routine or a change in plan.
Yeah.
And my parents read it as, well, she just wants her own way.
Yeah.
And what I say to people today is, of course I did. I still do. Who doesn't, right? But knowing how to flex and adapt and manage frustration when your way can't play out, that takes high-level thinking skills that I did not have until I'm in my 20s and I found this model and I go, oh my goodness, that's me. I have trouble with that. Now, I wasn't throwing chairs over it, right? But I was becoming anxious, and then I might say something with kind of like a cutting tone that didn't really work very well in personal relationships or at work, right?
Yeah.
And so once I learned how to have a strategy to not feel anxious, I didn't have behavior over it. And I was like, wow, this is such a relief, right? So I grew up in a Plan A house and I'm fine too. And my parents missed, because they didn't know, that I had a pretty glaring lagging skill.
Yeah.
And, why not teach kids how to collaborate from a very young age?
Yeah.
It's a great skill.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm curious now what your strategy was. You're like, I overcame this this missing piece. What was your strategy?
I had to use it just yesterday I go, oh my goodness, there's a storm and I have to go speak a couple states over, and so I've got to figure out how am I going to get there, right? And so it took a little trial and error. The first strategy I tried was saying to myself, what's the big deal? But it felt like a big deal, so that didn't work. The strategy I have used successfully for 17, 18 years now is, what am I most worried about? So that's when a change happens in my schedule, which frankly happens constantly, especially as being a parent. I now think, what am I most worried about? For me, that works because then I think of all the things that I'm worried about and I problem solve each one, and then I don't feel anxious. And then I don't have behavior, right? So it's a very cognitive based model that we're really trying to prevent bad feelings, because from bad feelings come unhelpful maladaptive behavior often. So we're really trying to focus on how do you perceive the situation, how do you think about it, so we can make some strategies to help that part go well. Then you won't feel bad, and then we'll prevent the maladaptive behavior. So that is my strategy that I use day in and day out as an adult.
I'm going to try it. I like it. I'm curious how we can combine the CPS model with the technology. So are we typically just applying it to children with egregious behaviors, or can it be really subtle issues that they're having? And, when we're talking about technology, it can be a whole range of things. And it's probably changing while I'm speaking to you on this call right now. It's like you can't.
And I would have no idea about it because I don't keep up.
I know you can't. No, you can't. No matter, you could spend every minute of every day and there's going to be some platform that's updating to do something different. So, no, how do we apply this? Like, what kind of, I feel like this is such a big, a big question to put into a little box. How can we break this down? I'm wondering, like, first of all, do we apply the CPS model to just the chair throwers? Or can we also apply it to kids that are, say, I asked my daughter to turn off her tablet in 10 more minutes and it's been 20 minutes and she hasn't yet. Like, are we able to apply the model to both kiddos?
110%. The title of Dr. Green's first book, which was for parents, was not his choice, and it's misleading because it's called The Explosive Child, right? So it's not just for kids who explode. It's also for the ones that just don't do things, or like my daughter, they cry and they sulk, right? It's for all kids. So their behavioral signal doesn't determine whether or not this is going to be useful. Certainly can be applied to screen issues. That's probably the number one thing we hear about from parents.
Really?
Hard problems to solve because those screens are so darn seductive, but definitely solvable. What we're often talking with parents is, we're very clear as parents what we don't want to see. Like, I don't want my daughter on screens all day, period, right? What we want to really think through is what is in fact our expectation. And that's going to vary by household, by kid, right? Like, you're trying to be responsive to the kid you have, right? For my daughter, and my son has different expectations. For my daughter, the expectations are, you have 2.5 hours of screen time to use a day. And we don't have it be all at once. You need to break it up and do productive things, including like homework and chores and stuff like that. That's the expectation there. My son's is different because he's 5 years younger and has different needs. So, we want to first start with, what do we want to have happen?
Yeah.
And we might have more than one expectation about screens. That would be fine. We're going to list those separately on that assessment of lagging skills and unsolved problems. Screens are unsolved problems, right? So difficulty for my daughter would be difficulty only watching screens. I'm trying to give you a real one.
Yeah.
Difficulty only watching screens for an hour before ending them to start your chores. Because she'll often, I'll walk in there and she'll be like, oh, it's been an hour and a half. I didn't even realize. Like, how about a timer, right? But anyway, or difficulty waiting to use screens until your homework is finished. Again, that's for my kid, but everybody's going to have their own based on their own beliefs and culture and all kinds of stuff, right? But I want to phrase it that way. This is what I want to have happen, and you are having difficulty abiding by it. That's where we're going to start. What is hard about that? And now it takes a little work. I mean, just because we do this beautiful entrance into the first step of CPS, I notice you're having difficulty waiting to use screens until your homework's done. What's up? Doesn't mean the kid's going to say, well, I'm glad you asked. Here's what's happening. And I'm having difficulty shifting mindset and transitioning, right? No, if they talk at all, they're going to say something very surface. And so we talk a lot about how do you drill for information? How do you get what you're looking for? High quality information that helps you understand how this gets so off track, right? And so you're not left guessing. So that takes some time doing, especially if you're starting with a kid who's not talking. Then we got to work through that. But we're trying to really get their perspective on what makes it hard to meet the expectation. Then we're going to say our worry. Again, and usually we're worried about something to do with health, safety, learning, right? And we just say, we don't lecture, we just say a sentence about our worry. You know, my concern is that I'm worried about you falling behind in school.
Yeah.
Or one I hear a lot related to screens, I'm worried about you having enough sleep so you'll have enough energy for the next day.
Yeah.
Right? That's it. Step 2 is quick. Step 1 takes time. Step 2 is quick. Step 3 is how do we, collaborate on a solution here? So, I wonder if there's a way we can help you with, and then you're going to insert what the kid told you, right? Like maybe they said something like, it really bothers me when I have to end a game and the game is not finished. And I start to get anxious about that. So how do we help you when, you're having a hard time ending screens because you haven't finished the game and that bothers you in such a way that you're not falling behind in your schoolwork? Do you have any ideas? Then, people get nervous because we always say, you don't know the solution when you enter this conversation, but rest assured, you're not going to pick one that doesn't work for you. You still, as the parent, have the power. You can't give that up, and we're not asking you to, right? We're just using it differently, right? So if the kid says an idea that doesn't, isn't feasible, isn't doable, then it's not a good idea. If the kid says an idea that only meets their concern and not yours, it's not a good idea.
Yeah.
If they have an idea that meets your concern and not theirs, it's still not a good idea because it's not going to work because it didn't address their worry, right? And sometimes kids don't have any ideas because it's a skill to consider multiple solutions to a problem.
I was going to ask you that. You were mentioning how part of this is teaching parents how to drill down. I get I don't know, a lot, the response of, I'm not sure. I'm like, okay, this is not helpful, but I want to work with you.
Yeah, we have some great ideas. And by the way, the whole model is free on our website, livesinthebalance.org.
I'll put it in the show notes.
Great. Yeah. If you go to our solution and go down to parents, the very first button is called the guided tour. And that's video of this whole model, right? And so we have some great ways for working with I don't knows. Real quick though, I like to think about what kind of I don't know is this? Is this I don't know, I know, but I'm not telling you because I think you're doing plan A and you're just being really tricky about it and a consequence is coming, in which case I'm going to talk about how this is not plan A, right? Is it I don't know, I know, but I don't have the words to tell you, in which case I'm the kid's partner, so I can take guesses and they can rate my guesses, like give them a Likert scale if they like that, right? Yeah. Or sometimes we use fingers. Kids don't even have to talk, like rate my guesses. 1 means I'm totally wrong, right? 5 means I'm totally right. And
I love
you can
that.
tell them, or thumbs up, thumbs down, whatever, right? We can get information in ways other than words, absolutely. Is it, I don't know, I have no idea, I've never thought about this before, in which case we need some wait time, maybe take a break, come back to it, right? What kind of I don't know are you getting? A lot of times it's the first 2.
Okay.
We also talk about wording. We're pretty precise on the wording of how we open this conversation because sometimes we can say things that will elicit an I don't know or a shoulder shrug. It'll sound like plan A or something like that. Sometimes our timing's off and we're trying to talk to the kid when they're already upset, which is not proactive, right? And so we've got a lot of good resources on the website to kind of help get through that. Also for kids who say, I don't care about that, I don't have to talk to you. Lots of ways to handle. Those are my favorite. I don't want to talk to you. I don't have to talk to you. Those are my favorite because they're usually thinking plan A is coming.
Okay.
And maybe not from you, but from someone.
Yeah.
And so, really, again, being honest and not forcing it, because when we're doing plan A, we're forcing things constantly because that's what we're taught to be helpful, pushing, right?
Yeah.
So just really saying, I'm not going to make you talk. I bet you have a good reasons for not wanting to talk, right? What would be the risk if we did talk, that kind of thing. So we have something called a Plan B cheat sheet, which outlines all 3 steps and then some helpful hints that are on there, depending on the response you get.
Okay, that's awesome. I'm really excited to check out that and use it. I'm curious if I'm on board and I'm ready to institute this Plan B CPS model, but my spouse is feeling like it's not the right mode, or there are so many different types of parenting styles, and when we combine it with tech use, like you go to a restaurant and you see some kids talking to their family, you see some kids on tablets. Families have such different styles when it comes to tech use. How can we sort of, I don't know the right question to ask, because I don't know if I should say settle our disagreements or work through our disagreements.
Yeah,
like, how do we handle that? We both want the best outcome.
Of course, and that's where you start from, right? And thinking about the model, actually, the model's not just for kids, right? We can use it with each other. So thinking about how, he needs to turn it off at 2:00. No, he doesn't. That's a power struggle, right? Between parents. That's 2 competing solutions. What we want to do is dial it back to concerns. What are you worried about if he doesn't turn it off at 2:00? What are you worried about if he does, right? Like we have worries, we have concerns, we have a perspective. That's where our solutions or expectations come from. Dial it back to that. What are you actually worried about? Because that we will get addressed. We will definitely address what the worry is, right? We hear different things when co-parents talk about, using the model, coming up with our expectations and solving problems. I mean, we have lots of parents who, they find the model and they think, oh my gosh, this is what we've needed all along, right? And then their co-parent is like, no way, it's completely different from anything I've ever heard of. I'm not doing that. Okay, so do the model, don't do the model is a power struggle, competing solutions. So what are the worries on both sides? Because we can meet worries if we dial it back. So we want to take it out of the power struggle realm. A lot of people, when they use the CPS model, are worried that, who are they going to be turning out into society? It doesn't hold kids accountable. Well, let's think about that for a minute. There's a false sense of accountability when we consequence a kid for doing something wrong, that we feel like this is tangible. We did something. They're serving their sentence. They feel that it's bad. Yep. And we've solved nothing. I mean, it's like 50, 60 years of research now that is accumulated that tells us it's lagging skills at the heart of all of this. So if they're just serving a consequence, they're not gaining any skills, right? And if consequences were going to work, you'd have to do it once and never again, right? And that's not what's happening. So, it's a false sense of accountability. True accountability is sitting down and helping us understand what's going on in your brain, right? Like, how does this go sideways? What's getting in the way of meeting expectation? Hearing where we're coming from in the second step, and then working with us in the third step to come up with a new idea of how we're going to work together going forward. That is true accountability, not serving a consequence. But it's important to kind of hear each other out as co-parents on what are our worries, what are our concerns. I remember my husband saying, poor guy, he's an engineer, and his wife is a supposed expert in child behavior. He doesn't stand a chance, right? But he says things like, or he used to, well, shouldn't they just listen to me because I'm their father? And I said, well, we didn't have robots. We had humans, right? We have humans that have their own thinking, right? And it isn't about that, right? My son, you can see he takes a minute to process things. And my husband gets into this like cycle where he'll say something to my son and thinks he should do it right away. But I'm watching my son and he's thinking, and my husband's not seeing this. So then he escalates because he assumes you're just not listening to me, you don't respect me kind of thing.
Yeah.
No. He would do well if he could. Something's getting in his way,
Yeah.
and he's actually trying to understand. It's taken him a beat to understand what you're asking, and he's thinking about something like, take a breath. He will respond in a moment, and he does, right?
Yeah.
So we need, and it's hard to remember this stuff, especially if we're tired or had a bad day, right?
I love it that you say he would do well if he could. Something's getting in his way, because it kicks off the right mindset for the CPS model. I think it makes space for us to find empathy for our kids. So let's all give that a go today. We'll be on the lookout for an opportunity where our kids seem to be attention-seeking, manipulative, coercive, limit testing, poorly motivated, and we'll say to ourselves, they would do well if they could. Of course they would. Something's getting in their way. Then we gather as much info as possible, we take our own concerns into account, and then invite our child to help us brainstorm solutions. The goal here is to find a plan that satisfies both our child and ourselves. This way, we're not only addressing our concerns, but we're providing our children with something that they agree that they can perform. Kim, I am so grateful for your expertise and advice today. I'm actually pretty excited to pointedly apply this method, no matter how small the issue is that I find today, and create a more trusting relationship with my child as I help them find their footing in their own little worlds. And parents, just remember, it's not about being perfect. Just try to be good enough.